I'm pretty sure that, so we know Katie's not coming. Emerson, I heard from him, he's not gonna be available tonight.
Okay.
And Paul Dietrich, I think you saw in the email he sent, he had tendered his resignation for the board. And I think that got passed along,
It does.
so
Do you have an exit interview kind of process or
I called him.
without prying into personal?
Yes, I did call him and I sensed that maybe there was a disconnect between his expectations for what his role might be in the board and maybe just my feeling about where we are as a board is that we're still kind of finding our way, finding our mission and getting a lot of stuff sorted out. And I think Paul had an expectation that he would be working a lot more directly with the police department, which maybe there is a role for that. He certainly had relevant experience, having worked with screening for police hiring and such. So I left it with him that, you know, we're still interested in hearing what he has to say. And if we have a session that focuses on training and screening and mental health, that perhaps he would come and want to share some of the research that he'd done. So we'll come back to that.
Yes, we just had a lot of turnover on the board. I mean, these two are originals and done a lot, and I just wonder if there's a theme that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, well, being new myself, I don't know.
Yeah.
I didn't get that sense
Okay.
necessarily. But it may have been, you know, those first few meetings, we were very focused on communication strategy and getting the website set up, and maybe that wasn't what he thought he signed up for. So.
That's fair.
All right, well, there was a very unofficial way of saying, let's call the meeting to order. That's the proper way to do that.
You just
So it's called to order. And so then we need to take roll call. And
Let's go around the table.
we'll just go around the table. Lexi O'Brien is here.
Sloan Carnfield is here.
Scott Fresh.
Kevin Sombart, present.
Central Father present.
John Buck, present.
And then we have review and approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Did anyone have changes to that?
Just the spelling of your name.
Just the spelling on the very top
Got
part,
it.
it was fine in the main body. No problem. Do I then have a motion to approve the minutes with that amendment?
So moved.
Kevin seconds.
Do we need to vote or just aye? It's approved.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll get it next time. The little steps, little steps. All right, then we have any updates or reports from the police department?
The only real update I have is that we've hired 4 new officers.
Good.
Congratulations.
Two are one from St. Louis City, one from Jefferson County, and the other is in the academy at the St. Louis County Union Police Academy. He will not be out until June 17th, I believe. So she still has 5 months of academy training. And we will still be down one spot.
One spot. Wow, that's better than most, though. Congratulations.
Yeah, good job.
Hopefully it will stay that way.
That's right. All right, so the main event for tonight is I had asked each of you to read through the collected comments. So these were pulled from that community survey. And it was the open-ended question field. And I just grabbed all of them and I took out any of the errant identifying data because there's some weird formatting things that happened to it. And I asked you to find 3 to 5 items that you wanted to bring to our attention. At first I thought, oh, we might not have time for all this, but I think we really will, as many as you have. With such a small group, maybe we don't need the big Post-its. I'd envisioned if we were all here that we could start to tally what's in common. So maybe that would be nice though, because other people, do we have anyone on Zoom? No,
There's nobody else on the.
no one else on Zoom. Okay. Well,
I could take note, I could just write them down.
yeah,
Take notes of
let's
it.
write it down and let's see. If we start to feel like it's not coming together, then we can go to the notepads. And then I've given some thought starters on how you might consider those items. So do I have a volunteer who would like to go first?
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
There's one comment that, and maybe you know this, is sure you do, but more WGHS resource officers, how many do we have in that role now?
One at the high school, and one at the middle school.
Want to get some more?
Well, I'll start.
Okay.
Yeah, I think several things came up. There have been themes we've talked about several times through this past year or two. Part of which I think aligned nicely with our mission. Part of which was need for more awareness of us as a group and of what we're doing and what the police have been doing, and making that a little bit more visible, both on the websites. Almost a sense of maybe it's promotion of, yeah, these are our achievements. And these are maybe also the promotion of some of issues that are in the news that, yeah, we do have existing policy longstanding on chokeholds and other things that maybe have a responsiveness to what's going on in the greater world. The other is probably more visibility that's in foot patrol came up many times in these things. For the police officers, I think we all have that desire to connect and to feel like your local, super local officer that's in different regions around town. I think we talk about that a lot in the medical world. Our medical world, we're getting siloed so much. Doctors in front of computers being siloed away from one another. And that feeling of connection is, I think, why we're here. To connect the police to the community and to have some, human contact and knowledge of who they are, what their names are. They even mentioned bios and what have you in there. So I think those were some of the issues that struck me most. Also, it's interesting sometimes the various ideas and opinions that are out there that have no validity. It's just that I've seen here, the hiring practices of good old boys network or things of that nature, or the reverse, from different points of view. It's interesting how there's certain perceptions that we need to be aware of and perhaps start to advertise how we're going to address or how they're being addressed or how that's not true. So that's what struck me.
Thanks.
I'll go next. I'll just read through them. I won't elaborate necessarily. It's just something we're going to talk about. My first thought was, I know the mayor's not on the board anymore, but like a representative from the mayor's office might be beneficial. Because I don't think anyone here.
That's Emerson Smith.
That's Emerson.
That's
He's from the
Emerson.
mayor's office.
Well, he's from the city council.
He's the staff liaison to the council.
Okay, that's
Basically, at the council meeting, they will each report on what happened at one of their meetings and inform the rest of the council, including the mayor, about what's going on and what the things have been accomplished and where they're at.
okay. So to that person's point, I'm on the board. I didn't, not to that extent that he reported directly to the mayor. So again, that's maybe a visibility thing, or clarification to be made. The other thing is when someone said they don't know enough about the board, that goes back to my third one, which was try to work to get something about us in the Webster Kirkwood Times so people can read more, see more about us and have a better understanding of what the board is for, what it does, who's a part of it. And the last thing was, there was an idea to give, for officers to give tickets to like children, or whatever, for positive things like for ice cream. But in the comment, it was at the expense of people rolling through stop signs, so you can write more tickets for the funding to do that. So we could find a way to fund something like that without giving more tickets out for stop sign.
The ice cream debt is low. We need to write more tickets for moving violations.
It's been some time ago, but we had a program where McDonald's donated it, but it didn't cost us anything. Where the officers did hand out tickets, they were able to get ice cream from McDonald's. That was a donation. It's probably, I'm guessing, how many do you remember? Was it 5 years ago, 6 years ago?
Longer.
Maybe.
When you get a little older, things blur.
So I don't know if that's something that the board would liaise between those organizations, or they do on their own, or how that would work, but I think that did resonate with me, something that. That's all fine.
Couple things that is, and we tried to start this before COVID hit, but the board should visit all city or organizations in the city. So we started that, and that was really positive. In meeting with the Rotary Club, meeting with the Alliance, meeting with the folks at in North Webster, the North Webster Neighborhood Coalition. It was a very positive thing to get out and meet with those organizations, and I think that should be, to me, continued, because you're touching a lot of different demographic and geographic groups when you're doing that. I think that there were quite a few students that actually responded to the survey that requested a little bit more engagement with the police department as a student. They felt like they were forgotten as a student that's living here but not living here permanently. One answer, this felt more like a quiz than a survey. Well, that was kind of by design, because we wanted to provide information as well as surveying the folks on getting their opinions. And I know that, people want to know what's going on with the crime that's occurring in the city, and the police have, and I don't think people realize that they have restrictions on how much they can report about specific incidents and about specific types of people involved in those incidents. Were there arrests? Were there not arrests? Chief Curtis can talk to that a little bit more, but I know there's some restrictions on the amount of information that can be provided to the public about specific incidents. But that was in there. One question that was really define diversity, inclusion widely, not just race. So that was, I thought, a very interesting comment on what is the definition of diversity and inclusion. And what does, a lot of folks are talking about this right now. What does equity mean? And that was in there. One other thing is a short meet and greet presentation that involved the police department, kind of an open house, kind of like what the firefighters do. To have an open house where the officers are present and people can meet them. Now, the issue that I see with that is I've attended several of those and nobody shows up, or very few people show up. So, to me, that's really an issue. But that's all I had at this point.
One comment I have about reflecting on when we went to visit the North Webster Neighbors Coalition. At that time, we had a really pretty bare website. Now we've got a lot more information out there, so I think that would be helpful as we go out and meet people to be able to say, oh, and yeah, go check out our website as we do more there. Sloan, do you have some
Yeah. A lot of what you guys had already said, but I think a lot of what I was thinking when I was reading through these was just the communication piece. A lot of the things that stuck out to me were just people maybe not knowing information that was out there because it was maybe just not the most user friendly, or there was even one about someone like not knowing when and how to call 911 and what situations like that
Yep.
applied. So I was thinking things like that, like, I don't know if on our website or social media, but just maybe like information that's findable, just making it more user friendly for people. And I also really like the idea, I don't know how this would work with like privacy things, but like a few people mentioned like officer bios or like wanting to get to know the individual officers more, whether that be in like the Webster Kirkwood Times or on a website. But I thought that could be interesting to like have a little blurb available to the public about like the officers they are. So yeah, that's pretty much it. But
Jenny Starkey mentioned that they've done, they do, for the city, they do get to know the staff. I think they also do staff recognitions for anniversary years and such, but that might be an option.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great article about Kim and getting the award in the, I think it was in the Webster Kirkwood Times, wasn't it?
So it was in the Times as an article, and it was also in
Yeah.
the Community Connect.
Yeah. And I had met her at the event that we had down at the Old Community Baptist Church. She was down there and we were playing washers.
Kevin, you are more familiar. Is Kim one of the SROs? No,
No,
she's not.
No.
I don't
She's
think
a
I've met
detective.
her.
Yeah.
Is she?
She's the detective, she's also our juvenile officer.
Okay,
But there was a new, I thought, officer in schools, right?
Yeah, Fred Bell is
Fred.
the new
Yeah.
SO at the high school.
Yeah. I had a lot of the same things I had about increasing visibility in different organizations like you talked about. I was curious about the number of resource officers. I don't know if it's necessary to increase that, but maybe to amplify what those roles are in those schools. I mean, may not be necessary to have one at Edgar Road School, but the high school and the junior high makes sense to me.
We have an MOU with the school district, so I can share that with you.
That'd be good.
That basically outlines what the duties are, what
Yeah.
they're expected to do, what they're expected not to do.
Right.
Their role has changed pretty significantly over the last 6 or 7 years.
Mhm.
So, I mean, it's the school district and us want to be careful about the interjection of the law enforcement type of duties in the school. So
Yeah.
that has changed pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I can share that with you and see what they're.
I know that's, I've been to some presentations that, where they study the school to prison pipeline and how that happens. And so avoiding that perception that there's too much law enforcement in the school or presenting in ways that aren't.
And one of the things is all the officers are required to wear the body cameras, but not school resource officers. They do not wear cameras in school
Because of privacy of the children.
because of privacy issues, and they don't want the students to feel as though they're being spied on.
Mhm.
I had social media, particularly in terms of communication, social media companies went out. I had, like you mentioned, using the Webster Perfect Times, or was it you or somebody about that? It's more of a video to get on our roster, photographs and things like that.
Mhm.
Domestic, I just have an interest in domestic violence programs and sexual assault because that's a pretty prevalent issue in a higher education setting I work in. So I thought that wasn't like a prevalent issue, but I think it was an important one that I picked up on. Couple references here to mental health, like you were saying, it's when you call, is it more of an annoyance or an emergency? Some of those could be mental health related if it's not an emergency. How do we talk about how we deal with that? Yeah, I had the DEI, kind of we had too. And then more frequent community engaged interactions. It seems to me like we have to kind of take that to something like. It's hard for it to stand alone, like, hey, come out today from 9 to 12 and meet the officers. It's like, what other event is going on that we could. Like, this is probably a bad example, but the jazz festival. That's probably too big of an event where you really don't have the capacity to have a lot, but if there's something to attach. A presence to an event that we know folks would come to, whether it's an Old Orchard business event or what should,
Or Porch Fest.
Yeah, yeah,
I like
something
Ford
that
Fest,
would
it's
be.
A little bit more people wandering around.
I sort of thought about it like in terms of Halloween, like every house you go to, it's got a
Yeah.
different, but everybody's going out. Because it's Halloween. So is there something we can kind of peg an interactive opportunity with officers to an event already that would accent accentuate that? Because I think if it stands alone, like I have been that guy over the years at Breadco, right? When you say meet an officer and have a bagel, it's like, I don't have time for that, you know, I'm going to work. But if it was attached to another event that we could kind of like, and we've talked about having a table there where a table wouldn't be useful as much as unless it was kind of like paired with something else. So that was kind of elaboration on one other thing that I picked up with the engagement with the board. And, you know, having something beyond, what do you think we should do? Like have information we can pass out about car thefts and, you know, the things we talked about here that are kind of recurring themes in the community. How can we address those at those larger events? There might be a way to kind of get more action.
Yeah, it would be nice to have some kind of pamphlet or something that you can pass out on some tips and things, you know, how to dial 911 and when to dial 911. I mean, all those kinds of things, what to do if, you know, in certain situations. And when I attended the fire department open house down on South Elm, the dispatch center had a pamphlet that they passed out on who they were, what number. Yeah, and I think they passed it out probably here too, because you were here. And so I think that kind of information would be helpful.
We could kind of take it to like more the technological route, you do QR codes that you run it and it gets you all that information. So we should maybe post that around,
Yeah.
scan it, there you go.
The other
That's a
thing
great
that
idea.
I'm willing to work on is I think the survey has a flaw, which it has so many older respondents than younger. And so I'd be willing to help craft another survey sooner than later, because I think there's some pieces of data here, but really, if you look at who responded to it, it's heavily weighted towards 40 to 60. And 7 from high school students or you know, students of that age, and probably nothing from the university too. So I would be interested in working with, I think we should talk about when's the right timing for a second survey that would be more, we could be more tactical in terms of who we outreach to and get a more broad representation, use some focus grouping if we wanted to, but I'd be willing to work on that whenever the timing is right. I mean, sort of, you have to be thoughtful about survey fatigue and just did this a year ago, you know, but if there's a timing, we could also talk about, well, like, once we find out what we're playing with and what we're doing here, I think whenever we decide to create that, I'd like to be involved in being part of building that out.
Your name is,
I saw you write it down, so
Yes.
it's official, right?
If you need to push something out to, you know, a message out to your university students, what means do you do it and how can we, you know, emulate that if we try to push positive social media out to what's your residents?
Yeah.
Saying, here's how you do 911, you know, a pro police tip for the month, you know, from the PCEB.
New suicide hotline 899 or whatever.
You
It's one
know,
of those
just
things.
here's this, here's something
Hey,
responding,
hey, oh, close.
pushing the data out without annoying the population, but I'm wondering if you have more experience with that
Well, it would be easy for me to access students at the university.
as a track.
As a group to promote to, it would be, you know, to partner with faculty that you probably know, that would be great, interactive, engaging teachers to say, hey, can you push this in your class and find a half dozen 8 courses at the high school where we're getting 18 responses from each one of those, then you've got a sample size that you kind of play with and learn from, which is right now, I think it's hard to kind of glean that from here. But I think to reach out to student groups and still reach out to, you know, the long-term residents or, you know, I think if we can have an array of geography and demographics with the survey, then it puts us in a position to kind of say, we know where the different groups are, then we can kind of respond and target wise to how do we.
Students will go home, say, report back to the parents who are busy and everything. They'll push it even further within their families when they go home from their high school. Say, yeah, oh boy, this.
Yeah, that was another missing demographic,
We haven't
is
been
the
this
young
good.
families.
Yeah.
There were not many.
And there are ways to capture that data without revealing identity. So, you know, we'd have to be thoughtful about, we don't necessarily need to collect email addresses if you fill it out, but we could say, check this box if you're this or this, that, or that. What's your family situation, where you're living, you know, what area do you live in, and we can gather that, and then that becomes the filter through which you sift through all the concerns or questions that you have. It's like, oh, the high school population seems to think more about this than the 26-year plus residents of the community. Well, then it's just, then you have more ways to, you know, feature information in ways that's going to be more accessible. I mean, people like us are going to use Facebook a lot more than you. We talked about that.
Yeah,
But we can Instagram the heck out of something maybe and have some traction with that, or work with other teachers there. So I think that, you know, I agree, the survey is what it is, but I think that there's ways to just retool it in some kind of easy, elegant ways. So
Can we use a different medium? Because I think that evidently there's restrictions on Google. So we need to probably,
don't think the restrictions on Google so much apply to the survey as they do to communications between board members. That's,
okay,
I think that's the kind of cutting through all of it. There's a lot of gray areas there,
Right.
but from my understanding. from the city
but there might be a different method.
there could be, I think that we would want to decide as a group, I would think, like, what is the methodology? We're going to use Google, we agree on that. We're going to use this format, we agree on that. And then once all the data is collected, we're going to park it where, like, and who has access.
Well, and something that gets tabulated automatically instead of having to hand tabulate it.
Sure.
That was the development of the original survey. You remember, was how we gonna tabulate the results, and that's when we, I can't remember, was it Cindy?
Cindy, yeah, Cindy kind of collated. and
Yeah,
came up with
Cindy
that process.
came up with that process, so we could, so it would be tabulated by
Yeah.
the software
Yeah.
rather than through manual
Counting.
tabulation.
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to do that. So you get the outcome. And then you can start playing with the numbers about, oh, this is why that's so big order. But yeah, we'll find a way to automate that. But this, I would think this group, as long as this group is on board with the methodology and how we do it and where the data is going to be saved.
I think it'd be fabulous.
And for how long? Then I think we've done our job in terms of like building it out, and then we can use it for a certain amount of time. At some point, it gets old and stale. So we can kind of sunset that data and let it go away, but keep the result, like the summary of it.
I think the university population would be such a test lab pushing things out. That's exciting.
Well, in the high school. in
And
my
high
opinion.
school. Yeah, definitely. High school.
Well, that's why the survey is limited to the older groups, is because of the Scott can attest to this, is that it was pushed out to groups, and then COVID hit, and the only groups that got pushed out to were those groups that had mature adults and older adults. And
Right, sure.
Right,
it didn't really get to any other young family groups or student groups.
And that's what's good about surveys is it's not just the data you collect, it's like what are the improvements you make for down the road. It's COVID tripped it up. And COVID tripped it up. It mentions what happened, but we can find ways to learn from that. That's why this is another way this data can be useful, is that it helps us refine and get something more accessible and accurate. And
yeah,
then
this
that
was
will
the first thing we really did.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. And with these comments, I feel it is positive. I mean, we've got.
Yeah, you have folks that are
Gather
engaged,
some
and we
information.
know that younger people will be engaging too, because they care about where they're living as much as anybody, does.
I'm gonna go ahead and give mine.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
really, everything that you guys brought up. I want to reiterate that communication, and it's that ease of finding information. So I think that there is a real interest in. I did see a number of times with that traffic stops report, which is a confusing. That disparity ratio, and I know too Curtis has explained that to us, and at some future meeting, I'd like to dive into that again. I know we've talked about it on the surface, but
Well, the
to
report's
this-
coming out again in June, and I
Yeah.
just submitted our data. And
Okay.
honestly, it's probably going to be not good again this year because the minority population went down again. That
Yes.
noticed was the main driver for the disparity rate was the percentage.
I
of
think it's
population.
bogus data, but that's my opinion.
Well,
Well,
it's only bogus in that because it's tied too much.
Right.
As opposed to, I think
Right.
there's a way to formulate it,
Mhm.
but it's really difficult. It's a complex issue, so I'm not blaming the people. Scott Decker was also was the one who basically designed it, but it's flawed in that it's not geared toward an area like St. Louis where you have 99 different municipalities
Right,
and different areas, so that when you're having transient populations going through your cities, it's not representative of the population itself. So that's where the problem arises.
right. It's a complex issue. I think we could spend a whole meeting just really digging into that, but I think it's something that I would like to find a summary to be able to share with the public. And that's a real communications challenge because it is complex. So we might have to study it over a couple meetings and dig into it.
Sure.
But
We
I
can
think it's
do that,
worthwhile.
but I'll say the problem, one of the things is though that no matter how you present it or how logical it might be, there's people on both sides of the issue that are
Yes,
not going to agree with whatever.
well, the data's flawed.
well,
I mean, how useful is flawed data? That's my point.
Yeah, it wouldn't be published as a study.
well, but it's
But it's out there.
It's done at the state through the Attorney General's office, so it's not a completely bogus, exercise. And I think it was created because there are national societal issues with disparities.
Sure.
And so you measure things that you think are important to try and understand them. And so maybe looking at individual municipalities is where this tool, has a breakdown. But I think there are probably still things that we can learn. And since it is out there and people talk about it, I think by us not saying anything,
No,
it's
we
just
have
like,
to
what
say
does it
something.
mean? You have to come out and try to explain, knowing that you're gonna get criticism.
I agree, it's very useful in those discussions, and I don't think there's anybody who would say that the concern and the reason it was created and the concern for why it continues to be that is that there are legitimate reasons that are behind it, so.
Yeah.
I don't think you're gonna find anybody here that's going to dispute that, so. But like I said, it's a complex issue, but I do think it's useful, and we can look at it and try and basically look at why it is the way it is for us and the disparity rate. I think, excuse me, I think we can just build on what we've already put out there. Sure. Again, if somebody has a magic formula, I'd like to see it. It's just,
Yeah,
it's something that's difficult to do.
Well, that's always the hazard when you do any kind of surveying at all. It's always going to be flawed. There's always that last part of the article that says for future research considerations, and it kind of explains all the things that make the data not as insightful or undercut what you're trying to find out. It just means you got to find a way to do it better and do it differently. And
Well,
that's the reality of doing surveys is
But
that
they changed the method and it made it worse.
Well, the example is, again, this year,
maybe the method had to change.
there's fewer residents stopped this year than even in the previous years. I think this year, again, these aren't exact figures because I don't run the percentages, but I've done them every year for the last 20 years. I have a good idea. And that is less than 11% of the stops were of residents, and the whole study is based on a residential population. So you're
Right.
getting 89% of the people who stop don't fit into the formula for the study. That's the problem. I shouldn't say that's the problem, that's one of the problems.
Well, that's the same consideration we need to take into account for Webster University. A lot of those are commuter folks who don't live in Webster.
Two-thirds of our students.
And so we could end up with the same
Right?
flaw in the data that we would collect, so, but we would still collect it. You
Right.
just work with what you get, I guess.
Yep.
the other thing that I noticed is community policing. A lot of people have latched onto that concept, or they have referenced how they want to get to know officers that are responsible for ensuring safety in
Does
their
foot
neighborhood.
patrols fit in that category for you?
I'm sorry.
Foot patrols fit in that category?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't recall seeing much foot patrolling happening around Webster. It's just, it's patrols and vehicles
Most
mostly.
of
right?
us in the two business districts in Old Orchard and Old Webster
Right.
are officers that do parking control and the traffic control in those areas are out of foot a lot, and then trying to make sure that they connect with all the business owners, and he also attends all the business meetings. But in terms of the neighborhoods, there's some, you'll see them, they can pull it, and there's a lot of foot patrols, especially in the parks, but there's not a design for a pattern of it.
Mhm.
And that's certainly something that we can take a look at and try and implement to some degree. The thing, we have to remember those are no longer, well, we don't have 60 officers, so we have to be careful about how we allocate our resources. Can't put them out on foot too much, because if we do that, something happens on this end of the city and this guy's out on foot, 10 minutes from his car, and this guy needs an assist, that could present a problem. Doesn't mean that we can't do it, though. We can certainly look at trying to implement some things where we can get officers out more on foot patrols. So,
I've got a comment about that. So my wife and I, a few weeks ago, it was a beautiful day. We were out on the front porch. Okay. And one of the Webster Groves police officers was driving through our neighborhood. Okay. And we waved. And she stopped. And she rolled down her window. She goes, "Are you waving for help or just to say hi?" And I said, "We're just saying hi. It would have been nice if the officer would have gotten out of the vehicle and come up and introduced herself." Something like that can go a long way to engaging with the community. I mean, I could have gone down and talked to the person, but that kind of activity goes a long way, especially on a beautiful day when the officers are driving around the community.
that's the kind of thing that officers can do, is when you're sitting out of your car and you're 10, 20 feet from your car, that doesn't
Right,
Yeah,
keep
that
you
would
from being
be-
mobile. So that's
right.
what I'm saying. That's the kind of thing that we can try and be a little more attentive to. Again, it would also have to be a matter of us planning for it and creating that motivation in the officers. One of the other things that you have to remember is, and it's not making any excuses whatsoever, but is that people are different, officers are different. Some officers are more adept at establishing those kind of relationships,
I understand
and
that.
some officers are not so adept at it. So,
Yeah.
I don't know, your story had me at, "Are you okay? You need help?" And that would have done it for me. And if they had just kept on driving. That kind of awareness, I think, is
Yeah.
what you can, Great one. I'm curious, I like what you were saying earlier about. I think one of the rules we can do is explain to folks, here's what foot patrolling means generally here. Here's how they approach. And when we have so many officers, here are some of the variables that have to be into consideration. And that to me is like one of these things we've been looking for to promote. Like this is, and maybe the business districts know that better than most do because they benefit from that. They see it weekly or daily or whatever. But that's a good example, I think, of the kind of stuff that we could. Hey, people want to know about foot patrols. Here's really how that plays out here. And here's how it's not going to play out.
Mhm.
We're not going to be walking around Blackburn Park for an hour. I mean, just, we're not
Right.
going to do that. It's because it's not.
We're parking a car at one end and walking
Right.
down through a neighborhood
Right,
at the other,
but
because
where
those.
the action tends to be
Yeah.
in this is right down.
In the business area.
Yeah, connected by one road.
Right.
So that could be an example of something we promote as, we're doing this the right way, or a right way, as opposed to. If you don't see it, it doesn't occur, because that's not true.
well, we can do, like I said, we can do a better job of doing that, trying to connect with the community. It's just that there are some limitations to it. So
Right, I get it.
we've had some residents who have put forward that we should be, that should be our primary effort is foot patrols. You just can't, in today's environment, you just can't do that unless you're overpopulated in your resources. We're far from that.
Right.
And that's exactly what I was thinking is that out of this conversation, we would have a few things that bubble up that we want to come back and look at a little more thoroughly. And what I've been sorting through in the past few weeks is, well, how do we do that? Can we break out into small groups and try to tackle each of these things and then come back? Or perhaps we designate a certain topic for a meeting. And we all do some homework around that so that we can have a conversation and come to some decisions about it. Chief could come in and have information that's responsive to it so that we can,
Yeah, sure.
have, I think we circle around a lot of these conversations. I remember, being out there on Zoom and listening to these same conversations. And so to come up with some conclusions and then communicating, because that seems to really be the theme that for me arose over and over in this, is that there's a lot that people don't know. And so Dale, you mentioned well, I mentioned the staff report just as one type of data, but it seemed like there was data that people want and there are limitations on what we can report. But is there a month coming up that you think, wow, this would be a really opportune time to discuss the kind of data and what information can we share about policing?
I don't know if there's any particular time we can do that, whatever I want. It's a difficult, and I don't know if maybe we get off on the wrong foot at some point, never go back on the right foot with Webster Kirk times. But I know, especially when Dwight Bittercopper was the editor, that was one of his concerns that I talked to him about several times, was that we weren't provided, that we were hiding information. And I don't know how I couldn't convince anyone, I could convince anyone else that we were never and never have, and never will hiding information, anything that's public safety related. We get to the paper to make sure it's a news report. If they have questions, we try to answer what we can. We are limited on active investigation, but what we can say and what we can't say. So I think we've done actually, despite that, I think we've done a pretty good job of being open with what's there. We got the eSIMs, which is electronic communications, that anybody can sign up for, that goes out every week, and says everything is there. Now, if we have, say we have a domestic dispute where there's husband and wife are separated, the kids are in problem, et cetera, and nobody's hurt. No, we don't put that out there. It really isn't me for us, not a public safety issue. And it's really isn't somebody else's business what that problem is. So those kind of things don't get out there, and we don't discuss those. But anything that's criminal or possible issue that's related to the safety of the public, we don't hold any of that back. Everything we can say, we put into the paper, we'll send it out, and we also send it out with the sense. If somebody has a question about it, we try and give out as much as we can. And it's been a while, but we've had the board here, we've had issues with some things that have happened. And I think we've been, correct me if I'm wrong, we've been pretty transparent and going over all the details and the why we did this, or why something happened or something didn't happen. And like I said before, we're not perfect, and when we're not, we make a mistake, we just say, okay, we made a mistake and we're doing this to correct it. So again, we try to be transparent, and we're not.
Looking at body cam video, which
We-
we have done in this group.
I think we've done a pretty good job of that.
But the problem is we had that here, but then we're not pushing that out there.
Yeah, that
And
was.
that's the communication piece is gotta be our top 5 priorities, because we could sit here and have meetings about each one of these issues.
And there's
I
zero
felt
in
very
10 days.
satisfied you're showing us all this, and I had a much greater understanding of so much since I've been here,
Mhm.
but I don't think I've shared that in any meaningful way with the public.
Right, and that's what I was hoping that we could do in the meeting, is take that next step to say, all right, what of this information is, how do we package that information for the public consumption? And a lot of times, briefer is better, and where you put out that information, I think, is also important. So you have a certain group of people that subscribe to that newsletter and see it, but there are probably 10, 20 times as many people that have no clue that there is a newsletter and wouldn't know to ask for it. And so perhaps that's where the PCEB can help the police department find what are ways to make that information more accessible. And it needs to be in bite-sized chunks, because people really don't want that whole, like, they don't care about the nuances, but we care that we represent it appropriately, that it's in enough context that it doesn't get misinterpreted. So
I've been asked, how do you just describe some events that occurred with the Webster Hills Police Department over the last couple of weeks? How do you get that information? And I explained it's on eSends. And I said, there's 2 ways you can get it. You can either subscribe to it, or you can go out to the website, or the Police Community Engagement Board landing page on the city's website, and you can get access to it there as well. Or you can get access to it and then subscribe to it. So, but I agree with you. I think that instead of having a bunch of issues, maybe if we just pick one and promote it. And then pick another and promote it,
The promotion is the,
but we'll submit it to, a community group in the high school, one of the groups in the high school. Send it to, John over at Webster University. Just send that information out and then it gets disseminated. I mean, you've done a fabulous, or somebody's done a fabulous job with the website. It's so much better than.
Oh, it could be so much more.
But it
There were
could be
so
more.
many things in this that I thought, this is an access to information issue.
But how do you
Find out
get
what's
people
out there.
to get there? You gotta get people there.
You do, but it's also, there's a lot of work into crafting
Oh, yeah.
communication so that it is short enough so that it's, put in terms that they can understand.
It doesn't have to be
Jargon,
perfect the first shot out. Our survey wasn't perfect the first
Exactly,
shot
and
out.
so we need to get started on
So
some of
just-
these and choose some.
Yeah.
So I have 3 things that I would love to come back to. I want to look at how data and policies and just the news that's out there. How can we look at that with the communicator's eye and say, well, what could the police probably have certain ways that you need to format that kind of information? Is there a summary or some social media posts that we do to promote where that information is? So I think that could be a topic, is how do we better communicate some of those? And we'll want to look into those areas that we also raised from here, where community policing seems to be a lot of interest around that, but what does that really mean? What are the resource constraints around that? What is the purpose of it? And I mean, it's been studied a lot. A lot of departments have implemented systems that are community policing, and sometimes they stop doing it for different reasons.
They're all different.
Yeah, so
And
I
it's all
think,
different levels of community policing. That's a real broad. So what is our model compared to others?
I like the idea of having a list of 3 or 4, we pick 1 or 2 of them and create, for me, it was helpful to get a homework assignment. I mean, I don't want to advocate for, more, but it was helpful for me to like
okay,
to prepare for this meeting by saying, here's some things to think about.
that was great.
okay,
And then I think we use this meeting to kind of hash out, okay, if this is the topic that we want to address, then let's just take a deep dive on that and maybe we split up a little bit. We kind of figure out where's the real source of information. Okay, here's the document or here's the thing.
Mhm.
And then we figure out where to plug it in and how to push it out there. And we give it a shot and we kind of say, oh, that sucked. And then we change it to the next one. Right? Or I think we find some ways of being able to create the storyline within this group of saying, hey, if you want to know what we're doing, we pushed out to this and reached X number of people because we had this many engagements, which you can get analytic wise on Instagram or Twitter or whatever like that. I can tell you how many people open up our newsletter. We could put this stuff in and how many click on that article. I mean, we could collect that information but I think if we were to kind of hone it down to 2 or 3, pick one homework assignment, what are some ideas we could push this out? I don't know every Webster Groves outlet that's out there, but I know a couple.
I think that kind of goes into what we were saying at the end of our logo meeting last week about having like, I don't know, different topics, like maybe 1 month is car theft, so then like when to call 911 or getting to know an officer, and then kind of putting out like, I don't know if it'd be monthly or every other week, but like some sort of post, or if it was in the Webster Kirkwood Times, like having a more like specific subject that was just like something people could look at in 30 seconds and digest all the information that would just answer questions that like answers are available, but people have to do research for it was just like all right there and easy to digest.
I agree with that. And I think there could be some merit to like just picking 3 and then repeating them. So we talk about car theft in January and bring it back in April, every other few
Yeah.
months. And then you've got a repetition with that because car theft is an issue year round, right?
Right.
So I think, yeah, the idea of kind of associating an idea with a particular emphasis or month, but we could do 4 of them. And push them out 3 times a year each, then you've done, you could say you've done your job in some ways by not just relying on one push out, but 4.
And we absolutely were talking about, we want to have essentially a calendar
Mhm.
of
right.
things that, so that it stays continuous, because I think the statistic I've read is people don't even register that they've seen something until it's at least 6 times.
Yeah,
That's right.
Is that what they teach?
no,
in marketing?
definitely, like, you have
Yeah.
to see it multiple times, it has to be visually, like, catching your eye, especially, yeah.
Right,
No,
that's right. I think this is also. This is wonderful. I like, it seems like people are coalescing around having a topic to focus on. So we've all shared out. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, good. This is a great segue then to Sloan, because we were talking about our social media and public service announcements, and Sloan and I met last week, and she shared all the great work that she's been doing, and it's now been run past Jenny
Yeah,
Starkey,
so-
who has said, hey, these are in alignment with the city brand standards, so
Cool.
she's gonna present to us now.
yeah, so we met and I had a few original ideas, but I wanna make sure to give you credit too, because we worked and edited a lot. Also, I have the pictures of them, but just to kind of preface it, I know at the beginning we were kind of talking about maybe having like a symbol to go with the logos, but I think as we worked on them more, we figured like having it be super basic would be better, especially for our purposes we'd be using it for like a name tag or a watermark on a social media post, that we wanted them to be simple. So we have like 6 different options. I have paper copies, but I guess if it's on the screen, that's definitely better. So this is the first one. They're all pretty similar, and just this one, I wanted to note that it's Jenny Starkey said it was her favorite, which I think is important just because she obviously has like more of a professional background in marketing. And then also we liked how this one, like the left column, the letters PCB line up, which could be helpful to community members because we refer to it as the PCB, so that might make that connection in their head. Then if you could scroll down a little bit. The next one is pretty much the same, just like the negative version of that, where the green is more bold, and then you can go down more.
And I think
yeah,
we
you have anything
did
you wanna
bold
add.
we did bold the first letters.
Oh,
and
yeah,
This one
these
is in
ones,
grayscale.
Letters are bold, and if there's anything, like if you liked the negative version but wanted them to be not bold or something like that, like I can easily tweak that if people have opinions on that. So yeah, this is just a gray version, and then here, this one I think is interesting just because it has the Webster Groves a little bit bigger, but I feel like that also kind of distracts, so I
agree with you.
okay.
No,
Okay, good.
if on that one, if they'll look, can you go back up? If you. On that one, if the background of Webster's logo wasn't black. But it was the same white and you had a line,
And instead of
then that might change the look.
yeah, that could be a good idea. And then the last like main standalone one is pretty similar to the first ones. It's a different font, which again, we could easily change the first ones to that font if you guys preferred it, but the unity in the word community is obviously different color, which could, I don't know, we'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, because it kind of gives the message of like unifying the police in the community, but also, especially if we're using it on like a social media post or something, it might be so small where you can't really tell what's going on. So we might want to keep it even simpler than that. Those are just some things to consider. And then the very last ones aren't really, they probably wouldn't be our standalone logo. It would more just be like an alternate logo depending on what we need it for. Like the bigger one would be our main logo, but if we were having like a social media post and needed like more of a small watermark, it would just be like in the corner, but they wouldn't be our,
Maybe that would be better for a name tag, maybe.
or like a name tag, but yeah,
Yeah.
it wouldn't be
Something
like.
where it's more of a sign than.
Yeah,
a main
yeah, but I
focus.
really like your comment on the PCEB.
That's essential.
That, I mean.
Those are my favorite, all of those ones.
Yeah.
And I think Jenny liked that too, just the
And
Name
you may want to decrease the font size of the other letters
Mhm.
and increase in bold, we did. But increase the font or not increase, but keep the font size of the PCB the same.
Yeah,
Could
But
we-
decrease
yeah.
the font size of the
Would
other
you please
letters.
scroll back up to the first
The first two.
page,
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
first two. So I am not as much of a. Well, I've been doing marketing for a really long time, but I've been more in the digital web space, so I'm not a designer. But I will say that one of the things that was a little unsettling to me, not on this one, but the one where unity was in a different place. I love Sloan's idea of community, and there's unity in the community. But it's also, you're breaking up that word. And community is like a whole thing. And so I wondered, just sort of subliminally, like community is an important thing. We don't want to break up that word. It's also can disrupt, your ability to read it and scan it easily when you do different type treatments, within a single word or in a phrase, especially when it's going to be fairly small.
yeah, I think that's partially why we also were deciding, like, we were messing around with different symbols we could have like in the background, but I think it just at some point. You have to keep it really simple for the purposes of what you're using this logo for. It's like more of a professional thing, just. Yeah.
I think any of those first three, we find the exception of making the change of making the other letters smaller,
Okay,
so that PCEB bar stands out.
yeah,
But how small is that
Not
gonna
just a
be in
little
a?
small.
we can
I
bold
think-
on this one, the PCB letters aren't bolded like they are on the other two, so I think that could help to
Yeah,
make them bold.
Yeah, I
Um,
like
Most
that.
voted
because
vote on that
Yeah,
one.
I like that because
Okay,
you don't even have to change the font.
Yeah,
or
Yeah.
anything.
I would
And
shrink
it's
or
kinda-
expand anything.
because we've messed around with shrinking the other
it's
parts of
too
the letters.
small when it's on the
Yeah,
And it
media side.
also
Okay.
got to be like on a different line, if that makes sense, so it just looked a little bit,
Space, yeah.
it looked, the spacing got weird, but
now Sloan is working with, some limitations in that. Her version that she's working with, we don't have real city fonts.
yeah, we
And
have all the
so-
city colors, but once we finalize it, like, these are pretty similar. I was emailing with Jenny, but she's gonna have to, like, I don't think you guys will probably even be able to tell when she changes the font, but it's gonna be like a little tweak to, like, we have paid for city fonts that are different than what's like available on Canva, which is what we were using, but
I think that font, I'm a font kind of geek, that's a little plain, like I like the fourth one or whatever.
the serif, the one with like the serif edges,
Keep going,
Yeah, that's
keep going.
this,
that one.
I like that one a little better.
Okay,
yeah.
I just like that.
Serif
But
font.
what if there's a font format that we should follow that for sure, but I think that's.
There's a serif font that
there's a
belongs
serif
to the city.
Webster Groves font, and it would be pretty similar to that. So if it was that logo, but then
Option
no
two.
unity and then the
PCEB.
PCB bold, or
bold.
do you like it where it's negative and the green's the primary background?
I think logos types usually.
We can
you
have
can have
multiple.
either version and it's legit.
And we'd also, oh, sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, this one, a negative one, and then a black and white one, because the black and white one will copy better than a
Mhm.
solid green one.
Mhm.
That's what we were talking about for especially social media. We made a kind of example social media post if we can look at later, but we changed it to be gray for that one. So I definitely think having a gray or a black and white version is important because green's not gonna necessarily look great on.
On
all
a
of
name
their
tag, it may be
flyers.
green, it may be black. That's good.
Yeah, a lot of like newsprint, it's gonna be grayscale.
Yeah.
Black and white. Some of the things that Jenny will look at is, do you see how like engagement and board are running into each other?
Yeah.
So finessing the typography to get the spacing between the letters, and it was just pointless for Sloan to try and do that.
Sure.
Having
Right.
the exact.
Oh, these are great.
But
These
I
are great.
loved what she came to us with.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
awesome.
it looks like we have maybe another thing to try out, and then maybe we can share it and make a decision. Do we go with the serif or the sans serif? Once we see it, we can decide. But the next part is the really fun part.
Oh, yeah. So then if you scroll down more, we have we'll change the logo in the bottom corner. That was just kind of a placeholder, but we have two different like, well, it'd be a part of one post. I don't know if you guys are familiar with like Instagram format, but like you could have one post where you like swipe from one slide to the next.
Right.
With like information. So yes, exactly. So we have two. So the first is just kind of the lock your car, get your attention. And then when you swipe over, we saw from the police's Facebook page, there was the 6 steps, I think, or the 9 p.m. routine. Was it? Yeah. And so then Lexi and I went through and we kind of, it had like little explanations under each thing. And we thought that that would be too much information for like an Instagram post, but maybe even like in the bio or something, we could go in more depth of what the different steps are, but for the graphic to keep it to just 4 simple steps that can be like processed really quickly with just the images. And then you can see the little PCB watermark in the bottom right corner, which I can change to whenever we finalize a logo, it will be that instead.
I
Yeah.
love that concept.
Yeah,
No, that's exactly, I mean, that's what we need.
Yeah.
Something that just boom, hits you with, and it'll get the attention.
Lock your car.
Yeah, well, there's even a whole rollout with the
I
actual
know what he's
PCEB logo. You know, you could have a whole campaign for that for a month saying, here's what's coming from us, and let them familiar with the logo itself before you introduce something like that.
Yeah,
And that would help get the word out about, hey, there actually is support out there.
it could,
Yeah.
but another way to look at it is that this is very timely and
No, sure
people
is.
are talking about it.
Yeah.
And so if we're introducing ourselves and offering some utility to them,
Yeah,
could be another way to look at it. But I think there's probably room for both.
Yeah.
Because Jenny has never said, oh, no, you can only do 2 posts in a month.
She
I
needs.
think
some-
she's probably seeking content,
Absolutely.
and if we have good content to provide her. And especially if it gets, some notice in the social media channels for the city.
Well, we
She'll
could do
be asking
something
for-
similar with a 911 call, right?
yeah, no, that's
I
what I'm saying.
think-
Reading all of these, I was like, there's so many different things we could make a
big time.
little blurb about.
I think
Yeah.
there's another one on the new 988.
Right,
Yeah,
which I didn't even know about, so.
Yeah, I think it rolled out in like maybe June or July of 2022. It's a fairly recent thing. So. All right,
Way to go,
well, it
Sloan.
feels like we've got,
Nice job.
thank you.
That's awesome.
And thank you for your help also.
it was really all the effort you put in, so. This is great, we're gonna keep rolling on it. Okay, so the next part that I want to go through, and I assure you, we can get out of here in the next 25 minutes and possibly much sooner. Possibly much sooner. I wanted to first, before I go into these statements of we want to appoint a committee or persons to do these things. To give a little background of, Dale mentioned a little bit about the requirements we have about using things like Google or the board to do to share work. And so I'm going to do my best to kind of describe it and some thoughts I had around maybe how we can comply with sunshine law requirements. So the concern is that the residents, city, well, not even residents, that the public has a right to be able to see what we're talking about, what we're working on, and that we're not working in collaboration spaces where it's like not detectable, like here's where we started, and then 2 months later, we're somewhere else. It's more that we need to be able to save like discrete points in time. Here's what we looked at on February 28th. And then when we came back on March 27th, we looked at this version, and that was the version that we voted on and approved. So collaboration tools like Google Spaces and Zoom and collaboratively editing makes that very difficult to do. And so the city has, I'm sure with the advice of the attorney, come up with some probably overly observant rules to try and make sure that we're giving the public all the, we're enabling the city to provide at a public request.
So the
what
abundance
they're-
of caution.
Yes, and so for right now, I understand the bind that the city is in having to do that. And
Problem is the technology has outpaced the sunshine.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
so it worked out fine with Sloan and I. We came and met here in the city hall building, and we did post on the website that there was a meeting here. So if anybody was really watching that, they could have come and, watched Sloan and I sit at our laptop. John and I tried to connect. We had some technical issues early on in the Zoom, and it did get resolved, but by then, kind of our window had passed. So it is an option for us to use the city Zoom. But someone has to be here to set it up. I feel kind of bad about doing that. Having somebody
That
be
was a
after
change.
hours.
Only two people. I mean, with just those two, they had to post it.
Yes.
Well, you didn't have, they did post it, but you didn't have to.
No.
Because it was only two
Less
of
than a
you.
quorum.
Oh, but I really thought it was like even with two people, but I didn't need an agenda.
Only if you were discussing policies. For what you were doing there,
Okay, for that.
it was not necessary to post it. It was not necessary to have an open meeting.
What if we had,
And quite honestly, if you two had been talking policy, it would have been okay because Sloan is.
Not
a
voting member.
but John and I, if
John and
we
me,
were
if you're
talking
talking
about
policy,
a survey and policy.
That's a
we
little
would
more
communicate.
problematic, but even that you might skirt by depending on what it was. It's when you get three or more people together and you're talking policy, even if it's not a quorum, that's when it becomes kind of a sunshine issue.
Were you here when the city attorney presented?
Think of it.
So I think that would be a good thing to put on the agenda. Is have the city,
I can ask Neil to come back to me.
ask Neil to come back and do a presentation on the sunshine law. For
I would
everyone
like
here.
some clarity, because if two people could meet together and not have to post it and be more spontaneous, it'd be way easier to coordinate our schedules.
Yeah, sure.
I would have to have Neil confirm it, but I think that's an area where you probably can operate without having a open meeting or posting an agenda. When you have just two people. But I know that we do Sloan. You're good.
Okay, great. So with that context, I had picked a few things that I thought were priorities from earlier meetings that we haven't come back around to make movement on. And so I'd like to get someone to volunteer for each of these, and we can have a couple people then, hopefully, that could work together if we think that more hands working on a single topic will make it move faster. So the first one was that I took from the community survey that we did. I summarized a lot of that data and I put it into a PowerPoint deck, and that's what John and I were going to do. We didn't quite get there. So if I could get a volunteer to look at what I've done, and I need some feedback. I'm not a person that is good operating alone. I like to collaborate. So I'd like a second opinion and helping to identify some priorities. One of the things I pointed out, Kevin, in my summary is you mentioned that many of the questions were intended to be sort of informative or educational. And so I thought an opportunity there is in this deck, if we can, when we choose to share it on the website, we could have a slide that says, and by the way, here's that question, or it's more like position not as a question, but here's the information. So getting some input on how much is too much information. And so
So do you want to post the slide deck itself, or you want to post information in some consumable way from the slide?
I think that might be a question for us all to consider. My objective is to get something out there. I feel that we owe it to the community when people filled out that survey to communicate something back. And what I'm looking for is feedback from the board on how much do we put it out and in what way. So it could be linked to a PDF. building it out onto the website, I would have to talk to Jenny about to the capabilities and can we have additional web pages, or is it really better to have PDFs that we connect to? But I was thinking, start with the information first that we think is.
I
the
mean,
right.
we were gonna work on that anyway, so I'm happy to still.
Okay.
Look at it and see how it might be articulated in a way that's
Okay,
easy to access and.
and if you want to
Summarize
get
it.
together, it sounds like, we can run that past the attorney to see if I could come meet you over at your office
Yeah.
during lunch or something, and
Was it these slides or is it something else? Is it,
that is.
it's a different
the-
deck you're talking about? right?
That is no, that's it. And that was just kind of a rough idea of grouping some of the information.
Right.
And how much do we want to retain and how much do we want to use it to sort of layer in a little bit more information? Okay,
Yep.
awesome. So John's gonna do that. We've talked last meeting, as noted in our minutes, about these small listening sessions as maybe being something that's more approachable for the community and also a little less embarrassing for us if you don't get a whole lot of people show up. And so I'd like somebody to volunteer to create an outline of what does this small listening session look like? Have any takers?
Well, I don't think that's our charge. I think our charge was to create a listening session via Zoom or whatever, not actually going someplace and having a small group.
Oh, I don't know that it would work otherwise. I mean, I think we've got to find ways to smaller schedule this together. I don't think people would log into the Zoom to do that.
No, they're not gonna show up at a coffee shop either. You said you wouldn't.
Right, but if it was someone like me working at a university that has, 300 employees that live in Webster Groves, I could do a listening session on campus with colleagues of mine in Webster Groves. It would be interesting. Yeah, I think part of it's leveraging where we know we could pull people together.
Well, the Webster U thing that I did was kind of a listening session.
That was a listening session, but we could establish another one of those. But I just don't, I just disagree with the small listening session. I don't know what you mean by small.
Why don't you tell me a little more about how you would describe the session that you did at Webster U? Because that's what my intention was.
Well, I think, first I had discussions with Jenny Starkey when she was with them and also with a couple of the faculty members called and spoke to me, and then they advertised it to many students on campus, and then was that on Zoom as well? It seems so, yes, it was on Zoom as well. And there was even a presentation, a video. Was that the one with the video presentation? And that was really a moving video presentation of that they wanted to share with us as the PCEB. And also there are a couple officers that were on the session, and we did spend a lot of time listening to concerns of several students that wanted to come forward and say what they wanted us to hear and maybe respond to later.
Mhm.
So I felt somehow they advertised that. I think Jenny Starkey advertised it with Vince Llewellyn and a few others over at Webster U that got the word out enough. I wish there were even more, and people showed up and shared.
Yeah, that's
Positive
that's
and
kind of what I'm
negative.
thinking it could be like.
So if there's reluctance for one person to say, raise my hand, I'll do this, do we want to talk about this at the next meeting? And we can do it collaboratively and check it off.
I think that might be easier to come up
Okay.
because it's hard to invent that on
Mhm.
your own.
That was just recorded, right, Scott? They weren't
Yeah.
live streamed, right?
Yeah,
The conversations.
parts were recorded but we were listening to
Yeah, that's-
it live and they were talking and.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It wasn't where somebody felt like they would be uncomfortable
Right.
talking. It was a.
I thought they expressed.
It's not recorded.
Thought it was recorded.
Was it
I
recorded?
think it was live stream. I thought it was recorded.
I don't remember.
I thought it was live.
Was it
stream.
live stream?
No, yeah.
It was
There were a
live
couple
stream.
aspects.
So
Yeah,
Yeah,
What's the thought, like one or two a year or? I mean,
we're supposed to have a minimum of one.
oh, and I accidentally got myself in another listening session on the pathway, because then the faculty. I don't remember, there were probably like 8 or 10 faculty, and they said, oh, I heard you were setting this up, and then I essentially had a listening session then as well.
Yeah.
Where I felt uncomfortable because I was worried I was breaking sunshine laws or what have you, but.
Maybe you did.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Well, it's, I think you could do that with the community groups. You could tie not have a meeting per se with the community group, but have a listening session with the community group.
It sounds like we need some more discussion around this. Centron, you have some questions about how many do we want to do and so let's table this for now. We'll bring it up next meeting and that'll be like the main focal point for that meeting. And we'll also have Sloan's revised graphics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I want to ask a quick question. Is that something that we can do by sharing those revised designs around via email
Yes,
and get a thumbs up?
yes.
All right,
Let's
let's
just-
not
we just need to
wait for
get-
another whole month.
No.
That's too long.
Agreed.
And can you pick just one of them, whichever one you want, and minimize the size, just so we can look at, see what that would look.
What it's gonna look like. That's a
Yeah.
good idea.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think in the context of your Instagram post would be a great thing to see.
Oh, it minimized like the font size
On
minimized.
the other letters besides PCEB,
PCB was smaller.
like this, if PCEB is 14, make the others 13, just to see what it.
You
Okay,
can. I think that's gonna be so subtle.
It might.
You won't, especially when we look at those logos at like the dimension they'll be,
Mhm.
but absolutely.
do you want me to send like, will you guys need like the green background, the white background and a gray background, or can I just do like one version and then like the fonts? And then I will do one where it's like on that mock, like lock your cart Instagram post, I can just show what it would look like in the bottom.
Yep.
See
Just
how
because it's
small it
important to
is.
consider like, you can
Size.
see it,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
okay.
If you think it looks bad, I trust your judgment.
Yeah.
Don't send it if it's like, we should.
It's
Just
it's
kinda like,
done
here's what-
good.
Okay.
And maybe we'll.
And I think
wanna
Jenny
get
will
Jenny
probably
to
be
help
able
with
to-
that,
Sure.
yeah, get the font. Okay, the last item that I wanted to raise, and maybe this is gonna be like. Your heads are gonna explode. We had talked about wanting to have a calendar of what are some of these opportunities for us to engage with some of the community organizations. And at one time, there had been a lot of enthusiasm about having that calendar. Do I have anybody that wants to put that together? Or do you think that maybe it's not really a priority anymore?
That's a lot of work.
It
I will
is.
tell you that right now. And to try to keep that updated. Ain't gonna happen.
Is there a way we could leverage Jenny Starkey for that?
There's already something,
To some degree, but I would guess there would be somewhat of an issue of her devoting too much time to that.
yeah,
So it's even too much time for her.
absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Key City, school district, business,
Yeah.
nonprofit and community association. That's a lot.
I know.
And having to
Well,
assemble that data.
it wouldn't, yeah, I wouldn't think that it would be every day, but I think we were looking for we decided we aren't gonna host an event that's just us because nobody's gonna come. That we need to piggyback off of someone else's thing to be present. And so that's what I had in mind. So it is a lot for any one person. Maybe we can ask Jenny, let's go back to this idea of the calendar. Maybe it's something that as we learn of those things,
We could
we
put it
can
out there.
each personally put in, oh, Kevin knows 2 or 3 people in the Rotary Club and
There's
to
an
be aware
event
of
coming
these
up.
events coming
I
up,
think we do
then,
it event by event for now, to see how it goes and see what it's like.
Yeah.
I'm not sure a calendar would benefit me in the way that I'm thinking about what we're doing.
okay,
I think so, to add to that, maybe political calendar, like we could hitch on to like a school board meeting. It's important to people who are running for school board, we're not in a political organization, so. I think being present and having the members, whoever's running for office, say, oh yeah, we support the PCEB, which should be benign, I would think, but. Things like that, I think, in addition to what you have, that's was just another
Okay.
thing to add, but.
All right, I'm not gonna cross it off of our list, our wish list of eventually, maybe we'll have it, but we've got to make sure it's got to be an easy enough lift that. All right, do we have any updates from these items? One of them, we were talking about the Webster University, the presentation.
Yeah.
Do we have when might that be possible?
I'll call Lori tomorrow and find out if they still have time to do that, or just would be telling them, hey, here's the next meetings in March and April.
Okay,
And see if that would work for them, and then, I can get a better sense of what they would talk about and how, just to make sure it would be a good fit, be useful, which we were getting ready to do before we did not get there before, but. I'll follow up and see what they have interest. They had a lot of interest last time, so I think they'd be eager.
okay, good. I think that would be really interesting. We do have permission to buy the lanyards. I've shared the links to Amazon with Jenny, and she's gonna order it so that we don't have to deal with reimbursements. So when we do have events that we're going to attend, we will have name badges. So that's business completed. Item number 11, homework. So I won't put it in the email this time. We've had all this conversation around other people's information about our perspectives on what they think we should be doing. So if you would each write your own personal statement of purpose for the PCEB and email it to me. This way we won't have to deal with collaboration in Google Doc. I will just paste them all together. And I guess once I see it, then I'm gonna know like how much alignment is between these. And so we'll come up with the next step. But my goal for this was to say, well, what is that one short, authentic, conversational statement that we might use when introducing who the PCEB is? So circling back around to what we were trying to do a couple months ago. Does that sound doable? Awesome. All right.
Wait, is it our purpose statement or what we think like?
Okay, yeah, let's, so. It would be, as you think about your involvement in the PCEB,
Mhm.
what is your vision of the PCE, the purpose of the PCEB? Why should it exist?
Okay.
What,
What would you say to somebody if they walked up to you and you said, I'm in the PTB and this is what we do?
Okay. All right, that helps. Thank you.
all right.
Just
That
put in-
completes
just
my
put in
agenda
chat- Just put in
items.
chat BBT and see what comes up. So.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. Thanks.
Thanks. See ya.
So we've concluded all our items. Would anyone like to move that we adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Do you want Neil here at the next meeting if he's available?
I'm sorry,
Would
what?
you want Neil here at the next meeting if he's available?
Sure, that would be fine. Let me know and then I'll put that into the agenda.
Confirm that, and then maybe the month after that, we can bring the Laura again. Unless you want to double up two things on.
Yeah, let me,
We can like on that. I'll find out. if we can like on that.
I mean, I would think that Neil's would be fairly short. It would be great if he can
If
give
we
us.
can get him, we
the
need to put him in front of the meeting. It usually takes him, unless you have a lot of questions, 10 minutes.
Right.
All right, well, I'll check more into that.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.